Now, the budget is usually a lot of numbers, and people tend to shy away from numbers. You know, we tend to say, oh, we're not good at math, we're not good at adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing. But we are going to demystify the budget for you this evening. We're going to take a look at some of those numbers. We're going to break them down. We're going to analyze, and we are going to look at what the numbers mean. To lead that discussion for us, we have two gentlemen who are certainly experts in the field of statistics and economics. Both have been offered yeoman service in the field and still do. We have with us the persons of Dr. Caroline Gilchrist. Now, Dr. Gilchrist is a former senior employee in the Ministry of Finance and Planning. He has held such positions as Director of Statistics, Director of Trade, Value-Added Tax, that's VAT consultant, and he has also served as head of the Macroeconomic Policy Unit. He has a background that spans over 26 years in public policy and management, 4 years in senior executive management in the private sector, and more than 10 years in academia and research. He has a master's degree in quantitative development economics and a doctorate in economics. He is currently an associate professor at St. George's University. Alongside Dr. Gilchrist, we have the chairman of the Grenada movement, that is Dr. Patrick Antoine. And Dr. Antoine is certainly no stranger to Grenada or to the region for that matter. He's a leading Caribbean economist and consultant to CARICOM and several international organizations. He is an international trade policy specialist, international trade and finance negotiator, economic development specialist, macroeconomic and agricultural policy specialist. As well as being an accomplished scholar, he is renowned for his commitment to the development and advancement of Grenada and Grenadians both at home and abroad. He's an outspoken proponent of strategic planning and thinking to resolve issues and build structures, institutions, and solutions. Now, before we get into hearing from these two gentlemen, let me just advise those who have joined us via various platforms, those on GBN, those on Zoom, those who will be participating in this forum, that you can post your questions. We will take written questions on any of those platforms that you have signed on to. And we are going to get two short presentations from Dr. Antoine and Dr. Gilchrist, because we want to make this session as interactive as possible. So we have limited time, just an hour and a half. So I'm going to be allowing about 2 minutes for each of the panelists to do a brief presentation. And then we are going to get right into the discussions about the budget. We want to make it interactive, so we invite you to get your questions together, listen to what these gentlemen have to say, and I would hope that you have been following all the discussions on the budget over the past week, and you would have perused the document yourself so that you have your questions ready, and we can really look at some issues within the budget as we get between the lines. A forum organized by TGM being carried live on GBN and WPG 10, also on Facebook on the Grenada Movement Facebook page. Now, without further ado, I've already told you a little bit about our two panelists. So we will first hear from Dr. Gilchrist, who will give us his presentation. Over to you, Dr. Gilchrist.
Thank you very much, and good night to listening public, all Grenadians who are listening to this budget. Tonight we intend to explain the budget to you in terms that you can understand. My opening comments relating to the budget is to focus on about 3 areas. One, whether or not there is a human and resource capacity to deliver the budget. Two, can we put hope with the numbers that were presented to us in terms of achieving the targets next year? And whether or not the gross domestic product as projected, whether or not that is achievable. So I'm going to focus on those tonight in my presentation, and I show you that yes, the budget is hope, but the foundation that has been laid because of the numbers doesn't really give us hope. And some of the numbers as presented are troubling. All right, it doesn't reflect the preamble statements of the budget. The preamble statements of the budget are well put together, but when you look at the numbers, there is no correlation between the two. So this is what I want to look at tonight, and I also have some recommendations that the government, those in authority, should look at in order to help them achieve the budget for next year. So these are my opening comments, and I'll get into details as the night proceeds.
Further ado, we'll hear from our other panelist, who is Dr. Patrick Antoine. Over to you, Dr. Antoine. Dr. Antoine, you need to unmute your microphone.
Thank you very much for reminding me to do that. Good night to the listening public. Good night to those tuning in on Facebook and other media. I want to say it's a pleasure for me to be here with Dr. Gilchrist on the panel. Good night to you, Beverly. Now, the Grenada economy was performing fairly well prior to COVID, but there was some danger signs. The rate of economic growth had started to slow. The level of unemployment, though reduced, remained high. Level of poverty was unacceptable. The level of and quality of education remained an issue that we needed to look at. There were unsettled matters regarding the settling the wage claims with pending negotiations. With all of this, the Minister of Finance was faced with an extremely difficult situation in the wake of COVID. And the Minister of Finance, like many others, could have done a number of things. In fact, two of the approaches that we've advocated, which are very simple approaches, is that the Minister of Finance could have opted to sit with his team and reimagine what the Grenadian economy could look like coming out of COVID and what was required in terms of the imperatives for growth and sustainable development, job creation, or the Minister of Finance could have projected, based on the old budgeting processes and the old structure of the economy, an extension of the economy as though COVID did not exist in substantive measure. Unfortunately, the approach taken by the Minister of Finance and team in the budget is not clear. If anything, it tends to give the impression that there is a carrying forward of a number of initiatives without the deep reflection and rethinking that is required at this time. Tonight, in this discussion, there will be no winners and losers. It is not a discussion aimed at trying to show up or unravel anything. It's a discussion that is aimed at putting the Grenadian people and the resources of Grenada at the service of the people, making them the handmaiden of development. And so at the end of the night, what we want to do is to shed light on options, shed light and make some recommendations that still can be taken on board. Indeed, it's not too late for the Minister and the government to take some of the recommendations on board. And tonight I'll be speaking substantively to areas of the new economy and areas of the new society that now needs to be triggered if we are to in fact come out of this sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Antoine. And as I said in my opening statements, we want to keep this as interactive as possible. So as we get into the discussion, I just want to remind our audience on all our platforms that the theme for this year's budget is Towards Vision 2035, Recovery, Transformation, and Resilience. I want you to remember that, because this is a statement we'll be going back to as we get through this evening's discussion. The theme, Towards Vision 2035, Recovery, Transformation, and Resilience. I would ask you, Dr. Antoine, as we get into this discussion, how appropriate is this theme for the budget at this time, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you, Beverly. Well, I think the second part of the theme on recovery, transformation, and resilience is certainly an appropriate theme at this time coming in the wake of COVID. The first part of the theme, though, is a little puzzling, where we speak about really vision. I think it's the National Development Plan 2035 for the following reasons. A National Development Plan really is a framework within which there is an expectation that you're going to have a number of short-run budgets. So you have the National Development Strategic Plan 2035 is a document that is there to guide the budget. In short, there really is no need to try to highlight that. And in fact, highlighting it does bring some bit of confusion for the following reasons. Every single country has now recognized that the development plans that existed before COVID now have to be very seriously revisited. In fact, many people have gone back to the drawing board with the national development plans, recognizing that the strategic approaches must be different. So to entrench the Plan 2035 and then to vest it, what is in fact arguably a very good approach in terms of the themes that the budget said would be based on, does bring some confusion, because you are in fact talking about two different constructs, one which is based on the past and one which is based on the future, which is time-bound, short run, and is aimed at delivering some very concrete results at a very difficult time.
Because one of the things which stood out to me as it talked about towards 2035, that vision, which, as you pointed out, was created before there was a COVID-19 and certainly needs to be revisited. Dr. Gilchrist, how do you see this strategic plan, which was put in place years ago, long before anyone thought of COVID? Do you think that's a good foundation to build a COVID budget on for 2021?
Yes, well, just to say in the beginning that I took part in the consultation process leading up to the plan, and it was a plan that was very, very, very comprehensive, very, very comprehensive. And I know that the budget still is presented, as the minister would have said, in alignment to the plan. So the vision is still the same. And I have no issue with the vision maintaining the same. Of course, COVID would have derailed a bit. And so the issue facing the authorities is how do we get back on track? So I think the vision is still there. It's a very holistic vision. And I think all parties, all Grenadians can attest to the usefulness and the purpose of that vision. So the vision is still relevant. What is needed now is a recalibration of the priorities now that will put us back on track so that we can continue the effort towards achieving those goals and visions. So it's still relevant, but in short term, we have some issues, we have some challenges, and I think this budget should recognize that and not to pretend as though in 2021 we're back to normal. I think that pretension may not be rare. It will take about 2 to 3 years for us to really get back on track. Some countries may take longer based on the resources that are disposed of. So we have to accept the reality that we are off track and we need to relook the situation at present. And what has emerged out of the COVID experience, and we are still in it, is the emergence of a new set of priorities, a new labor market is emerging, new industries are emerging. So a number of things are emerging that was not really conceptualized in the original plan. And these will have to be factored in as we look the plan and we shape the plan, but keeping the goal vision the same. So this is what I would say at this point in time.
Yes, when you mentioned that it is still relevant, that 2035 plan, I right away put it in the scale and want to measure it to say, how relevant is that plan? How does it speak to the transformation, to the recovery, and to the resilience which is talked about in the latter part of the theme, as was highlighted by Dr. Antoine. But we are not going to spend a lot of time on the theme, but I want people to think about it. Wait, how relevant is it? And a lot of people may not even know. Dr. Gilchrist, you were involved in the consultative process, as you say. And I believe Dr. Antoine had some input as well into putting together this 2035 vision. Many people out there do not know what it contains. I know a document has been floating or has been floated somewhere, but it has not been studied, it has not been discussed, and the budget certainly didn't highlight what part of that 2035 plan is still relevant and how it is going to factor into this recovery, transformation, and resilience that it is seeking to build. But let's discuss the contents of the budget. In an overall macroeconomic sense, when you look at the budget, are you satisfied with the overall thrust where it is seeking to go? How can you speak to this budget to say we're in a COVID state? How can it really, how can the allocations, how can the allocations really work as they were presented? You want to start with that, Dr. Gilchrist, and we are inviting those who are watching and those who are listening. You can send in your questions as we go along, right? And right now we want to look at the contents of the budget, not just the allocations. The allocations, I think, have been discussed over the application, the thrust of the budget, the priorities, the policy signals that have come from this budget. How do you respond to that aspect, Dr. Antoine? And you have to remember, yes, that's one of the things you have to learn in this.
I thought you had called on Dr. Gilchrist. I was readily waiting for him to proceed.
Yeah, he respond secondary to you,
Fantastic. So this is the thing. I think we need to be very frank with the Grenadian people, because I think for fear of walking in media, we will leave the public confused. A development plan is not about the vision alone. A development plan, we can all accept the vision in the plan. In fact, I had a very heavy hand in creating the vision, and I rally around the vision and always will. I think it's a very good vision that every developing country, not just Grenada, ought to pitch at. But the plan is about more than the vision, isn't it? It's about how we are going to put the economy back on track in the case of a COVID environment. It's also pre-COVID about how we prioritize and provide for development using priority sectors, resources, and of course putting a monitoring and evaluation framework in place, because our plan is as good as its implementation. And so the point I want to make, and I want to make it resoundingly, is that we need to revisit the plan. The vision, I agree with Kulan, the vision is common, still attainable. But the plan is about more than the vision. And secondly, in getting on to the question that you've asked about whether I'm satisfied, the answer is that there are some things in the budget that I think give us a cause to rally around the construct of what the government is trying to achieve. There's no question about that. For instance, how we deal with admirable, what the government's trying to do with housing, I think is admirable. I think those are important things that I think every single one of us ought to celebrate and rally around. But there's some other things. What we're doing, for instance, with agriculture, and I'm not talking about superficial issues tonight. We want to get to the root of it. What we're doing with manufacturing, what we're going to be doing with micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And I'm not talking about really superficial approaches. What we're going to be doing to leverage the squadron of young minds in Grenada that remain unemployed. And how are we going to transform this economy, which every single developing country now is recognizing is predicated on digitalization? I want to repeat, every single developing country is now premising its development going forward on digitalization. How do we then leapfrog the digital divide in ensuring that our students have access to the best learning, not just at home, but also from abroad? How do we stimulate e-commerce? How do we create, for instance, single IDs so that the persons who benefit from pension payments don't need necessarily to walk into a ministry going forward? The work is, it will come back nearly to that for some sectors, but what we have to do now is to leverage and unleash all of these resources that COVID has exposed in creating what we call the new economy with new approaches. How do we deal with creative services? How do we deal with issues such as the oil and gas resources, and feeling that how do we stimulate renewable energy in a real way that brings the price of energy down from 40 cents US per kilowatt in Grenada to 4 and 5 cents as it is in other countries, so that we can get industrial development. These are the things that we wanted to see in the budget. I don't think the budget addresses that properly. So the answer is, there are some things that I can understand. There's some things in the budget that really, they're at war with the philosophy of the budget, because they're not going to lead to transformation, and they're not going to lead to the kind of resilience that the country wants to see, and I know the Minister of Finance wants to see as well.
Just to put another different dimension to what Patrick was saying.
Yes, Dr. Gilchrist, we're hearing you.
Yes, a dimension to what Patrick was saying. Now, the projection for growth is about 6%. I've heard a lot of my friends argue that is not achievable. So let me just say that it is mathematically achievable, right? Because
all right, Dr. Gilchrist, I want us to get to 6%. That's exactly where I want to go. But before we step into that 6%, I want Dr. Antoine to highlight for me what is it about housing that he believes is one of the areas that is commendable and should be highlighted as far as the budget is concerned, with the direction in which the government is going. So let's look at the housing and what's good about it, what's trending right, and then we look at the realism of achieving that 6%. We come right back to you after Dr. Antoine addresses. Is Dr. Antoine there, or is he still muted? Well, Dr. Gilchrist, let's discuss the 6% until we get to Dr. Antoine. I'm not hearing him, I'm not seeing him. I don't know if technically he's been interrupted.
Yeah, so as I was saying, the 6% is mathematically achievable. It's obvious, of course, in 2020, the decline is projected to be at 12%. A lower base, so anything you do above that would mathematically give you an increase. So it's achievable once you have economic activity beyond what has happened in 2020. Now, just let me explain what GDP means for the general public. And when we speak of the GDP, it means gross domestic product. That's where you value the goods and services that a country produces in a given year. You put a value to that. So this is what we are talking about. So if you have an increase in activity, economic activity, you have an increase in gross domestic product. So when we speak of growth, we're speaking about an increase in activity. And that would mean more people at work, more output is being realized. And output can be realized based on people, based on technology, and all of that put together will give you your output. Now, generally speaking, you like to know that your GDP is is a result of increased employment. So you want people at the center of producing your GDP. This is very, very important, and hence many countries get involved with investment and to ensure that when you have an investment that contributes to your GDP, that your local people are employed. So they take part in producing the GDP, and this growth is sold, you get an income from it, and they are remunerated. So you look at the income part. So people should benefit from the GDP that is produced. So this is the general sense of gross domestic product that we are speaking about. So I'm saying in 2021, a 6% is projected, and mathematically that is achievable as long as you get the activity going and so on. So I want to make that point. But what is troubling to me is that you need the private sector. I want to get to the huge capital spend, but growth, you have to do it in partnership with all stakeholders, government and the private sector. And therefore, you have to give the private sector a sense of cooperation and a sense of that you need them, encourage them to participate in economic activity and to remove the barriers and impediments, create a kind of business environment that the private sector would flourish. So if you look at the statement the minister made, for example, regarding fiscal measures, and fiscal measures are tax measures or expenditure measures. Now he started by saying that there is going to be a strong drive to collect tax arrears. And I was shocked when I heard that statement, because as far as I know, coming out of the social adjustment program, the tax authorities, Inland Revenue and Customs, and mainly Inland Revenue, there was a lot of rationalization of taxpayer relations. As a matter of fact, tax compliance has improved tremendously by those two departments. Value-added tax, for example, compliance rate now is about 85 to 90%. So I know there have been tax compliance. So the idea of going after arrears, the signal that you are sending to the private sector in a time where they are struggling to recover, baffles me. It really, really baffles me. And of course, I don't know if the reference here to going after tax arrears, that maybe some assessment was done that says that, hey, there are about $10 million in arrears that we need to collect as part of our revenue measure. I don't know that assessment was done. But I think in this time, you don't want to send that kind of signal. What you want is to work with the private sector. As a matter of fact, I am bold enough to say that what the government should be really doing in this time now is to give some kind of incentive or relief to the private sector. So maybe a moratorium on the taxes that are due in 2020 should be advanced to the private sector and say, hey, use that money, of course with conditions, right? Use that money to reorganize the businesses, keep workers on the payroll, and get the economy going. So maybe that should be considered instead of saying, let's go after them, because I don't know there is anything to go after. The compliance rate has been good. So I don't understand that point about going after tax arrears. Where are the arrears? Except you could argue that in 2020 we shut down in around March, and I know that company taxes the financial year in March and October. So maybe there is a delay in tax filing. So maybe that is what is referenced. I don't know, but in essence, there is no real tax measure. There is not. So I'm a bit surprised at that statement. And of course, the other statement about expenditure rationalization, that has been going on for years. Every budget we have with expenditure rationalization. But these are not things that warrant such an emphasis in a budget. These should be operationalized within the respective department, driven by performance management, and really, really included in the job description and judicial responsibilities of the employee of the Ministry of Finance. So I don't see the need for the heavy emphasis. There is nothing there. What we need to do in the private sector is to embrace them as we work together in going forward in spur economic activity and get things going. So I just thought I'd make that point. The issue of going after tax arrears, I don't think there is anything there. As a matter of fact, there's no target set. Like just money would save by taking those measures. There was no target set of how much money they are chasing after. So I don't know if it's worthwhile spending resources going after monies that I don't think is there. If there is something there, work with the private sector. In fact, offer them a moratorium on the taxes that due in 2020, and I think the private sector will welcome that. The private sector is supposed to be the engine of growth, not the government, is the private sector. So while there's emphasis on the PSIP to drive economic activity, I'm hoping and wishing that there's a strong connection with the private sector that would benefit from those projects, right? And that projects are so designed that there's a strong participation of our local private sector to benefit. I'm hoping that. I'll make some other points of capacity in this area later on.
Yes, Dr. Antoine, did you hear the question that I had posed to you about housing? You had highlighted. Yes.
Yes. And apparently I got dropped off. Apologies to the viewers. Housing. Yes, I'm very happy that the government has recognized that there is a need for us to, in the context of extreme poverty in our country, with the housing stock having been improved after Ivan, but where we still have quite a bit of living conditions that make treating with pandemics of this nature more difficult. That they have recognized the importance of us to build the stock. And in that regard, I think in the budget, though difficult, I think there's a $5 million for housing assistance somewhere. And then there's another $10 million, $5 or $4 million. I think it's about $4 million in a soft loan program. And I believe there is another $10 million. It's about $20 million for the improvement program. What I want to say, though, is that I don't think it's enough. I think if the government really wants to stimulate the economy, we need to do it in a number of sectors, such as housing, where I believe people have a vested interest and where we can leverage social capital, working with investment capital. And social capital, for instance, we've seen work traditionally in Grenada, where you have, for instance, communities that assist the elderly with refurbishing and building houses. In fact, I grew up in a small community where people would break and re-establish houses elsewhere, and also where we would come together as a community and assist with housing works. And of course, you would have very skilled people directing people who are not so skilled. So that what I'm saying here is that I believe that if we leverage social capital on top of the resources that we need to boost up anyway, then we can have a drastic improvement in the quality of housing in our country. But I want to acknowledge that that is certainly something we need to give some acknowledgement of. The only issue here is that I continue to be concerned about the large, even at times like this, follow me, at times like this, about the large emphasis still placed, for instance, on the housing that's built, for instance, by foreign governments in our country. It seems to me as though we have to try to change that model. There are countries that have changed that model from where you have essentially, quote unquote, the government of China, the government of Taiwan, or someone else providing, a project in housing to a model where the foreign state works with an increasingly large component of contractors and workers in the receiving state, in this case, Grenada. That changes the model to build out the housing stock. And I want to make a plug for that. It calls for some negotiations that are not going to be as pleasant, but it's certainly something that some states have done. And I believe that that is the other component in addition to increasing the allocations for housing and leveraging social capital that I think we ought to make, which is where we have some negotiations. If you're going to give us support, we want the support in the case of housing, but we want to be able to bring more of our people, more of our contractors on board. And the final thing is PPP. The government used to leverage its funding to get more public-private sector partnerships in housing. That is possible. It's happening all over the world, particularly now, where we're going to have a number of Grenadians returning home. Of the diaspora is that many people don't want to return home and are going to be looking for housing. Yes, many of them would have left 20, 30 years ago. And I believe it's a good opportunity for us to leverage public-private sector partnerships to build out the housing stock as well. But they've recognized housing, and I want to applaud that.
Yes, and while we applaud the housing, that the government has recognized, let me put it on the table that the government-supported housing is targeted towards, we would say, low-income household. Kurlan touched on the private sector recently when he talked about the achievability of the 6% growth. And if there is going to be some real progress as far as housing is concerned, wouldn't you say that opportunities have to be created for the middle class, for the private sector to get back on its feet so that people within that sector are able to build and buy their own houses rather than depend on some government scheme that will, at the end of the day, probably not even give you the type of house that you would want, but it gives you a roof over your head, which you will go for when you do not have a choice and there are no other opportunities available.
Yes, I would agree with you, and that is where I think the public-private partnerships particularly play a role, where they are geared towards providing, almost various prototypes of homes that are young couples, returning persons who are scaling down. Many families scale down from big homes as there's the empty nest, phenomena setting in, into smaller homes. We want to have a situation where the public-private partnerships, and the partnerships need not be partnerships for cash. It could be partnerships where you actually give the concessions and incentives to a private consortium, such as, for instance, credit unions and construction companies. I'm particularly interested in how we can see a leveraging of credit union liquidity and the competence of Canadian contractors in filling this niche. In short, I would not want to see this opportunity go to foreign companies, because I think if we're trying to stimulate economic activity and get our economy moving, these are the kinds of things I would have expected to see in the budget.
Right, and as we look at what we would expect to see in the budget, Dr. Gilchrist has said that the 6% growth is achievable. But in relation to the major targets that have been set, revenue and expenditure targets, for example, Dr. Gilchrist, you want to look at those figures and maybe do a comparison with last year, or with this year, 2020, and with the year before, 2019, to just do a comparison in responding to how realistic are these revenue and expenditure targets. That's one of the areas we look at. We also want to look at how realistic is capital expenditure based on what has happened in previous year, what is projected for 2021 in light of the COVID-19. Let's just touch on those two areas. How realistic are these targets?
Okay, so if you look at the budget summary, in the estimates of revenue and expenditure, in 2021, tax revenue of 653.5 million is forecasted. And of course, the tax revenue is dependent on economic activity coming back up. This can be compared to 2020 of 654.2 million. So basically, the revenue projected is flat, but it also is premised on the assumption that the economy would start rebounding. It will be premised on that. So if the economy does not rebound as projected, those revenues would not be achievable. So that's tax revenue. And of course, there are no new tax measures. So an increase in the revenue is based on increased economic activity, not going after a raise. All right? It's based on increased activity. Now, the other major revenue category is non-tax revenue. And I want to make a point on this. 63.2 million is budgeted for 2021. 2020, what was achieved was about 59.4. So just about a 5 million increase in non-tax revenue. Now, non-tax revenue refers to fees, user fees and license and all of that transfers from, if any other statutory corporation or companies make a profit transfers and so on, dividends from companies that government has shares in, like Grenlec and so on. Now, of course, if the economy doesn't pick it up, what may happen to non-tax revenue? It may even decline. People may start compromising. Okay, my insurance is due for my vehicle. I don't have a job, so I don't renew my car insurance. No, that's not right. But they take the risk. So you might find people start cutting back on some and commitment and obligation to doing certain things that are important. So the point I'm making here, there's a slight increase in non-tax revenue, but it also premised on the economy recovering and people start working and having disposable income, because if things go for the worst, then the non-tax revenue may not be achievable. So the revenue projected in general is flat. Notwithstanding there's a 6% growth. Now, generally speaking, you assume if there's growth, meaning increased activity, you should have an increase in revenue. But we know in most developing countries that hardly there's any relationship between growth and revenue. And so while we try to establish that relationship, we should be, because tax revenue should be based on how buoyant the economy is. So more buoyant the economy is, more taxes you should collect. Hence, the I was making about in a COVID economic environment, there is no buoyancy, so you shouldn't be going after tax arrears in any strict and strong way as indicated.
And not just the tax arrears here.
Yeah.
Why or how do you explain that the projected tax collection, when it fell by 50%, as the Minister of Finance has said, after COVID-19 became a real thing in Grenada, tax revenue fell by about 50%. So is this making an assumption that there is going to be economic activity on the same level almost in 2021 as there was in 2020 before COVID?
That's the assumption. That's the assumption that at least you collect what you should have collected in 2020. That's the assumption. And it's a risk, but as the authority said, is a budget of hope. So they are hoping that can be achievable. And we wish them well.
Is it a budget of hope or a budget of wishes? You wish that this will happen.
We wish them well as a Grenadian. I'd really like them to achieve it, because it really would affect government's ability, to honor its commitment to the welfare program. And
is it a budget of hope or a budget of wishes?
Well, let me just jump into a couple of things. First of all, I want to just get on the growth figure, and I think the growth figure of 6% is achievable. I think if you look at our history, the trajectory of what has happened when our country is at crisis, you see that we've had growth numbers in the double digit. People seem to forget that. We've had growth of 12%, we've had growth of 7, 8, 9% over the last 20 years where we've had crisis. We've emerged from it. In a lot of instances, we emerged from it fairly strongly. What's different this time is aggregate demand. I will speak to aggregate demand a little later, because the aggregate demand now is compromised in a way it hasn't been before. But I want to see that if you look at the capital expenditure, which I know you want to come to, you've said it a short while ago later, capital expenditure budget, if it really is going to be achieved, will genuinely stand the chance of driving an economic growth rate of more than 6%. And the way in which the growth rate, and I heard the tail end of what he said, has been presented by my colleagues. Unfortunately, it's absolutely incorrect. Growth rate in 2021 of 6% doesn't mean that in a real sense you have to then go 12 and then 6, which is 18. That's not how it's done. Economic growth, it mathematically comes to an end on the 31st of December. Whatever you've lost, and that's the economy is down 12%, it's down. And then from the down 12%, so if you had $100 million and the economy, your GDP then is $88 million, you then project forward from 88 and you get 6% of 88, so that the economy, as Minister Bowen said, without elaborating, is still going to be far smaller in 2021 than it was in 2020 and certainly in 2019. In fact, when we look at the estimates, what we are doing, because we actually ran some numbers, the economy is looking like it's going to be about the size in 2018, if we are lucky. So we're talking about an economy that's essentially going to revert to its size in 2018 if we are lucky. Yes, in short, in relative terms, you can say we would have lost growth. Yes, so that's where we are. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think that the government will struggle. While I have an issue with the matter of growth, and I think we can achieve it, and we all ought to drive towards achieving it. Kirlan is right. We all on the same page here. We all in this boat together. Revenue is a different case. When you look at what the statistics are telling us, it tells us that the trade balance is down, economic activity is down, imports are down, and getting a lot of movement in and movement out. Part of what we are able to garner in Grenada comes from trade taxes across the port. Taxes are going to be down. And the other component of this is the corporation tax and other taxes. That you must understand the corporation tax in 2020 is based on performance in 2019. So what we're seeing in terms of the corporation tax in 2021 is going to be based on performance in 2020. And 2020, as we know, has been a year when for most of the year we've been on lockdown. So that the numbers are going to come into roost for 2020 and 2021. And so when you look at the performance on the trade tax side, what comes through the port, and the performance in terms of the revenue, you're not going to be doing very well. But there's one more important indicator that we ought to look at, which is what's happening with tourism. Last year, at the end of the tourism season, in short, we got most of the tourism revenue because the season went to March. It normally ends in April. So we got most of the season from October to March. Now on the upswing, and we should be strong, we're not getting the revenue. So for that reason, and because tourism is such a large part of our GDP, about 25%, but a larger part of our export earnings, it's about 70%, we're going to be down in revenue. So the government will struggle on the revenue estimates. It's not a happy day, and I think we have to start looking at that because I think we're going to see some conflations and some contortions with the budget if we have to get by.
Yes. Doctor,
I want to make a point that Washington and tourism, there's another dimension to tourism. Now, in terms of foreign exchange earnings, about 70% of tourism earnings account for foreign exchange earnings. Now, this is important. So even within the region, we notice a desperate attempt to get the tourism sector back on track. And that's where you get foreign exchange earnings from. To pay for your inputs. If you continue the level of inputs to get, and of course, when you import more, you get more revenue, we have to pay for it. You don't pay for a car from Japan with EC dollars. You have to send US dollars to pay for a car from Japan. We have to own it. And this thing, and owning foreign exchange comes mainly from tourism. So it is important that the authorities do what they can do, albeit the tourism product is changing and transforming into various kind of products and branding. But it's important that efforts are being made to support the recovery of the tourism sector. That is important because if that don't recover soon, we will have a serious problem. Once you have foreign exchange problem, it leads to balance of payment problems, and we start to accumulate the value of the dollar. So it's important that that sector be given whatever it needs in terms of support. I noticed in the budget there is a $2 million for airlift support. I would have liked to see that to be more, but it's important. So I thought I would mention that part that in terms of supporting what Patrick is saying. We need to get that sector back up and running.
yes, and I want us to just change gears here a little bit because we have been talking a lot about what the budget did not do and what it did not show, and comparative figures with what has happened over the years, some trends that may be not so realistic, although in the midst of all of that, we have said the 6% growth is achievable, but only if. And the only ifs that we have discussed so far, only if the economy rebounds at a certain pace, only if we can get tourism back on track, only if a lot of things that really need to happen does happen. So we are still eyeing that 6% cross-eyed because a lot of things, there are a lot of only ifs for us to get to that 6%, although on paper it appears to be realistic. But let me just remind our viewers who are watching us on GBN, on WPG10, also on Facebook, and right here on the Zoom platform, that you can pose your questions, your comments on any one of these platforms, and we will air them for you and have our panelists respond to those questions and those comments, whatever they may be. We're looking forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, we want to shift gears and we want to look at your forecast. If you were to forecast how the economy is going to perform in 2021, what would be the basis for your forecast? Tell us. Right now, we're not looking at what the budget says. We want to hear from you as people who have advised on economic issues. If you were to do a forecast on how Grenada will perform in 2021, bearing in mind the realities that we know now, what would be your forecast and what would be the basis for that forecast? Dr. Antoine, you want to go first with this one?
Yes, thank you. I think the first thing we need to do is to look at where our economic activity comes from. And if I were sitting where the budget is now coming from in terms of its policy signals, I would want to ensure that I do everything possible to work with the SGU to restart people coming into Grenada, not necessarily to attend the classes, but by saying to them, as Barbados did, that Grenada is open for you to come and essentially live here, attend classes if you wish. But I want to create a bubble, which is quite possible, for students to return to our country. I don't think enough is being done with that, and I've noticed a shifting of the signal from the SGU. What I'm saying is not. I am not saying that we're going to force the university to bring people back. But the university's tenor has shifted to where it's basically saying, well, look, in a sense, if you wish to come, right, then you can in fact come and attend classes online and I suppose use the facilities. And we want to work with that because that is such a big part of our economic activity. The second thing, I did say the second thing is that we want to create aggregate demand. We want to create aggregate demand for agriculture because we're going to have a situation, if we're not very serious about what we do in terms of finding markets for agriculture, we're going to be faced with a situation of glut. The budget only mentioned exports 3 times. 3 times. And so what we want to do is to focus on 2 things, the supply side, and I'm not talking just about putting the same old production systems back. I'm speaking about hydroponic farms, I'm speaking about precision farming, I'm speaking about aquaculture, I'm speaking about essentially putting those things to work now, so that when the recovery does in fact come, our people would have learned to produce under those new modern agricultural systems, so that in fact we are able to target markets which are being targeted even as I speak. So that I'm talking about a new agriculture. This is what we mean by the new economy. And thirdly, what I would do if I was in the seat now is I would drive a number of programs dealing with information technology. And I would be targeting a number of the young people who are qualified at CC level. I would be training them so that they can take up jobs, for instance, which I would create from attracting investments for people who want to do things like medical records, keying in medical records, and those kinds of higher cluster offshore services. I wanted to make that point. Vocational training. When this world reopens, there is going to be an upsurge in demand, and there was already before it locked down, of people in vocational training, and we want to be able to provide those skills. So I would use this time to essentially prepare my young people to take up jobs in vocational training, micro and small enterprise development today. Grenada has an excellent micro and small enterprise development strategy. In the budget, it's not recognized. In the budget, the funding for micro and small enterprise development. We also have an excellent export opportunity if we were to fund Grenada's export development strategy. We have great documents, but it's only as good as its implementation. And while the budget talks timidly, and I do say so very, very loudly, timidly, about some funding in those areas, we know that micro and small enterprises provide more than 50% of the jobs in any economy. In some economies, the activity that comes from them is greater than the economic activity coming from bigger firms. And so if we are to dynamize the Grenada economy, we now have to put those things in place. And what does that mean? It means that we now need to give some more support to GIDC. No more budget freeze, because you now need to pull up GIDC so they can support this process. GIDC now has to create some incentive systems for micro and small enterprise firms, because those firms do not have any incentives if they operate outside the priority sector. So we have a very clear agenda of some of the things we would like to see, some of the things which are possible now. And the government can use some of the fiscal space. It can use some of the fiscal space to redeploy resources that it can borrow to drive these things that will give us economic activity. So for instance, I have said it loudly, I would not have spent money on the airport right now. I would have done only the things that are necessary. I would have used the fiscal space to fund a number of these programs. And while I'm at it, let me just say that if we want to dynamize the economy, we need to put money in the hands of people, and teachers included, and the public servants included. And we have to find a way to settle them off. You ask me what would I do now to stimulate growth? Well, if you look at the numbers, you will see that 62% of our people who were surveyed in the Q2 2020 survey, they do not believe that the economy will get better anytime soon. And when you look at the numbers and you see that about 50% of these work for an average income of less than $3,000. And when you look at the numbers and you see that we have people in Grenada, 32% of them missing meals. And when you look at the numbers and you see that we have about 40% of persons who don't have more than 3 months savings. And you see that about 20% of those persons have absolutely no savings. If you put money in the hands of these people, and you put money in the hands of these people, including teachers and public servants, the effect on the economy in terms of spending is going to be a lot greater than if you took the same money and put it in the hands of big contractors to do big projects. And I'm saying that we need to create aggregate demand. I can go on, and I'm making the point as follows. There is the fiscal space. The issue is policy choices that we make. And it is not about consumption. It's about driving the economy. A lot of people are not asking for money to splurge. They're asking for money to live. We have people in Grenada going without food, missing meals because the levels of poverty is rising. This is how we need to stimulate the economy right now. There's so many recommendations on things that I would do different in that budget today that would give us greater economic activity, greater employment, and make us more resilient going forward.
And I want to throw this question at Dr. Gilchrist. It's a viewer question, a question from one of our viewers. The question says, can the panel explain how the budget speaks to job creation? How many jobs are expected and in which areas?
Well, for my reading of the budget, the job creation aspect of the budget is through the projects. Now, the capital projects is projected about just over $300 million to be spent on the public sector investment program, which is the capital projects. And all these projects, as was said, would generate jobs. And that's where the job creation, the stimulus for job creation will come from. What Patrick was pointing to, if you create jobs throughout the economy, then you have a greater impact on activity and you are able to stimulate the economy. So the budget is using the projects to drive job creation. I don't know if there's a lack of confidence in the private sector. And I'm not seeing any incentive to the private sector to drive jobs. Although some of the projects, there are some private sector projects coming on stream. But those jobs are short-lived. What you want is to create permanent jobs. Not just jobs, but in fact, what you want is to create employment. Because employment speaks of career and livelihood and so on, as opposed to a job that is task-oriented. And I want to use this opportunity to make a point about job security. Because there is this thinking that job security is enshrined in you having a permanent job. What happens? You're already insecure. Because if there is a downturn in the economy, or maybe your job becomes redundant, then it's very difficult to find another one. So job security really lies in job mobility, in the acquisition of skills, broadening your skill set.
Yes, yes.
When you broaden your skill sets, you are better secure. You can move from one job to the next. And going forward, emphasis has to be on training, reskilling, retooling, reinventing. This has to be the emphasis in order to guarantee that you have job security and you're able to keep influencing and impacting demand and driving economic activity. So this is very, very important. Retooling, reskilling, and this is part of the transformation agenda. It starts training and education. And when I look at the budget for the Ministry of Education, it's just 10% of the current budget. That should be 15%. If you're seriously talking about building resilience among your people, all right, or giving them an opportunity to grow so they can take advantage of opportunities that are emerging in this global changing dynamic world. This is very, very important. So I made that point.
Yes, so if I were to put what you said in a nutshell, the budget as it is speaks to job creation in an abstract way, because that job creation is dependent on these capital projects coming on stream. You have to unmute Dr. Gilchrist. Unmute your mic, Dr. Gilchrist. You're not able to share with us. Good.
Another point to this, what we call the absorptive capacity. And I want to make a point about the freezing of the posts and positions within the public service. It should have been done differently. Because what you need really is a skills inventory, an inventory of skills within the public service. Identify the skill set of the public service and realign and rearrange these skill sets to fit the priorities where government wants to push the economy and push services. That is what should have been done. So while in principle it looked like a good initiative that you save money, but in any case there was nobody in those positions, right? But nevertheless, what has to happen now as a guarantee that capital projects will be realized? We need to realign the skills in the public service to support the skills requirement of all those projects. So remember, Grenada is a small country. What happens after Ivan? There was a building boom. And what happened? There was a shortage of labor, shortage of skills in certain areas. We're talking about a massive $303 million in capital projects. If these things are implemented from January, are we prepared? Are we able to the capital equipment required for these jobs, the human resource capacity to execute this job?
Changes in sleep pattern, changes in appetite, lack of energy, no interest in work or hobbies, difficulty concentrating, constant sadness, thoughts of death and suicide. These are signs of depression. But there is help. Call 440-2269 and save a life today.
Hey, well, man, that's you making us that trip. Why doing all this more? Things tight since COVID, you know. And Christmas coming, the toys to build, and my house and my car to repair, and the wife go and chill with and what you want me to do? I'm expected to do all that with more. Well, what you want me to do? Why don't go down my communal? You don't have to pay them until January. They have 20,000 in giveaway giving away, and the interest rate low. And listen to me, I try them orders and them never look good. Who they want them on? Well, watch, like you have more than your ass. Choose your loan at communal, giving you the money for what you want to do. It's a loan for you. You know what? I'll get them a little try. Listen. Where you going on this mud? You don't need it. Leave the mud, man. When you go down there, the rate's low. Low.
Physical activity for a better sleep. Physical activity for a healthier weight. Physical activity for healthier skin. Physical activity for a healthy mind. Physical activity for strong bones and muscles. Physical activity for a healthy body. Physical activity to reduce stress. Physical activity for a healthier and happier you.
Hills and Valley Med Care Center, located on Grenville Street, St. George's, has a highly professional team that gives excellent service in massage therapy, physiotherapy, speech therapy, medical consultation, and more. Hills and Valley Med Care Center sells a wide range of medical supplies, offers home visits for patients in Grenada and Carrier Crew, and opens Monday to Saturday, 10 a.m. through to 7 p.m. Visit or call Hills and Valley Med Care Center today, 435-6904.
Get your home ready for Christmas with Idle Style Talent Band. From now until Christmas, get amazing discounts of 15 to 50% off on porcelain and ceramic tiles. Save a whopping 50% off when you purchase all of a low stock model. Plus, get chip edge tiles starting at just $1. That's right. Ho, 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 just $1. More incredible in-store specials available to give you a head start on your home or commercial projects. Make your home more inviting this holiday season with our Ready for Christmas sale. Visit us on Monroe's Road, Grandad's, or call 439-TILE today.
But you don't have the traffic. and you pass that debt on to future generations, because this generation clearly can't pay for it because I said there isn't enough traffic, then that is something that our youth and the next generation should be concerned about. But if I borrow, for instance, to put a deep certification program in place, which certifies my youth in technical and vocational skills, which makes them marketable anywhere in the world, in shipbuilding, in plumbing, in a range of services, interestingly, that the world is demanding, in animation, in apps, in programming. Those young people are going to be there for another 20 or so years. That's a good borrow.
Dr. Antoine, Dr. Gilchrist, I would not be able to wrap up this forum tonight, regardless of what the clock says, without speaking to youth and ICT. Now, you mentioned it in passing. Both of you have mentioned the youth and ICT in passing, but we have seen a huge increase in the allocation to the Ministry of Youth. But I have not seen diversification in the youth programs. And as you just outlined, there are opportunities in ICT which are not being tapped and have not been tapped. Now, looking forward at the budget, and I'm going to ask you to answer quickly so that we can get to your wrap up, because we just have very few minutes left. What would you do with the allocation to the youth department as far as ICT is concerned and creating opportunities, long-term opportunities for our youth today? Dr. Gilchrist?
Yeah. Well, simply, I would incorporate the whole idea of ICT and training, skills training in ICT, into the program, and get them involved in programming and all the different elements of computer techniques and all of that. So I would get the youth involved, because, as you would know, is the platform that will drive development. That's where this economy is going. The platform for driving development will be on ICT. And I would quickly as possible get the young people trained in ICT. I would encourage and incentivize the young people to get into small businesses that are ICT related, whatever aspect of ICT. So that is important. I would give them incentives to form cooperatives or find their own small business, develop their own small business in the area of ICT. So the Imani program should have that element to it of entrepreneurship. That element where those who have the ideas recognize those and give them support and help them form into an organization or into a business unit that will help them to drive that skill set going forward. I think this is very, very important, because, as I said, if you notice the economy now, everything is online. So there will be services that will require the online platform, and all what goes with maintaining the online platform, e-business, e-commerce, everything and service. Now we're moving into the digital cash and digital money. So there's tremendous opportunity opening up for in the ICT area, and I would use the money program to some way incorporate and expose our young people to those new initiatives and those new technologies and get them prepared. And once they show skill and innovation, they should be encouraged to organize themselves into business units and create employment for themselves and drive the economy growth. So I'll quickly get young people involved. So that is a dimension I think is important in the Imani program, bringing that element of ICT training and skill development, value to the Imani program, and give up people.
Yeah. Dr. Antoine, I'm giving you just about a minute to respond to that question. Youth in the budget, despite the increased allocation to the youth ministry, do you think enough emphasis is?
No, and just to say that digitalization, not just ICT, digitalization is going to be the cornerstone of our recovery and our sustainability going forward. Training, certification for the youth, partnerships with Grenadians in the diaspora, and big corporations in the diaspora that want to form partnerships with developing countries where there's talent. Financing, so that we can finance some of the business arrangements, either on a matching business or a public-private partnership basis. Young people who have ideas. Digitalization of the whole economy is where this is going, and the youth are well positioned to drive it in all education, in housing. Everything now has to be based on this notion of how do we create a digital economy in all its various dimensions, and we've been doing well on that ticket. We're talking about it in a narrow sense.
Yes, and we're going to take this final viewer question. We have 30 seconds to respond. Housing and returnees, in terms of attracting returnees to the island to purchase, build, or rent, there are a number of major challenges: frustration, integrity, professionalism, skills, and trust. How does the panel suggest that the government address this? Very, very quickly, Dr. Gilchrist.
Yes, so we just had to create a special incentive package for the returnees, from tax concession to allowing them to be able to, returnees, sometimes some of them are pensioners and therefore want to have their medication and all these kind of stuff in Grenada. So I would create immediately a special incentive package for returnees that would make it attractive to them, so that when they come, they have an incentive to put all the things together and to invest in the economy. Right, I remove all the impediments for returnees, all impediments. I know there is supposed to be a incentive package now. You get concession and move beyond just concession if you're in a vehicle. All right, so if you want to get in housing, I would give you a special package for that. So we need a special incentive regime for the returning residents.
Thank you, Dr. Gilchrist. Dr. Antoine, very quickly.
Yes, special regime, half of the story. The other half, we all know in Grenada, many returnees to return. We need standards. We need certification and standards because it's good for the economy. It means that when we hold people to professional standards, they can export those services by now providing it, not just to the returning. And secondly, we need to be able to leverage the financing that exists, making the terms easy. And in that regard, let me just say that I'm making a plug for a distressed assets fund, where people who have houses can essentially get them renovated using the capital from returning residents, and they
And my final question to both of you, but before you respond to this question, I just want to thank all those who have joined us, and especially say Tillman Thomas, who is there in the audience on Zoom, listening to and participating in this forum. We would not have achieved our objective if the audience was not there with us. I want to thank you all, and I want to thank former Prime Minister Thomas. 30 seconds each to respond to this question. Both have lectured, have worked in statistics, in economics for years. If you could grade this budget, what would your grade be, and why would you give it that grade? Very quickly. Dr. Gilchrist, you want to go first?
Yes,
grading it out of 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest.
Voyager Main Store is your favorite home goods store, and Voyager 2 stocks all your Christmas items. Both are located on Granby Street, St. George, on the upper and lower floors. Beautify your home this season with curtains from Voyager 2. Get 5 pieces for $75 or 4 pieces for $100. We also have a wide range of Christmas lights and Christmas trees with and without decorations. Voyager and Voyager 2. Check them out in downtown St. George's today.
It's new, innovative and classy, and a cut above the rest. Your one-stop shop for bathtubs, kitchenette, customized doors and windows, and even a new paint job. We also sell quartz and solid surface countertops. At M&N Hardware, we offer best prices, excellent service, efficiency, and reliability. Visit us at Dusty Highway, Grandin, St. George, or call telephone number 440-6757. M&N Hardware, from foundation to roof. Let's build together.
Hey, what's up? This is your boy Omi wishing everybody in Grenada, GBN, happy holidays, love, respect, stay safe. I'm out.
GBN Television News at 7, a pulse on all things Grenadian. Look out for our new features through expanded synergies with our media partners in Barbados, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Trinidad, and beyond. Capturing the latest in news, sports, weather, and entertainment. Credible, informative. Thank you for making us number one. News at 7, live, Monday to Friday on GBN Television, Channel 7 and 11. K105.5 and 105.9, Hot 98.5 and 98.7, GBN Television Facebook page and YouTube channel, and www.gbn.gd. GBN, with you anywhere and everywhere.
From Monday, November 2nd to Thursday, December 31st, GBN's Christmas Caravan will be blazing the trail of goodness across Grenada. Join us as we journey daily to find the hottest deals this Christmas season. Win prizes from our partners. Get recipes for your favorite Christmas treats and bust a tune in the Christmas Karaoke Fun segment. It's GBN's Christmas Caravan. Weekdays from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Live on Classic Radio 105.5 and 105.9. GBN Television Channels 7 and 11. GBN's Facebook page and GBN's YouTube channel. Your mid-mornings will never be the same.
The Christmas Caravan is brought to you in part by Hubbard's and the Food Fair Supermarkets, Kittens Healthcare, Sisson Spade, and Bright